Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me and the BCStrategies Experts for a discussion on what to expect AI in business communications in 2024. And for those of you who aren't familiar with BCStrategies, we're a group of independent analysts and consultants. We provide insights on unified communications and collaboration, contact center, CX, CPaaS, and other related areas. You can find our articles and podcasts on BCStrategies.com and also follow us on LinkedIn. So today, to kick off the discussion, I wrote an article this week on No Jitter about what I expect to see when it comes to AI as it's used for unified communications, contact center, and CX. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then after I give my thoughts, we'll open it up to the BCStrategies team. And that's one great thing about BCStrategies is we've got a lot of smart people with a lot of different views and opinions. So to start off, I wrote that I anticipate 2024 to be a year of experimentation. There's going to be a lot of trial and error, and there'll be, a lot of good positive results, but also some disappointing ones. And we're going to see a lot of revisions to business plans and a lot of changes that companies are going to be going through. And I've been saying this for a while. A lot of businesses felt that they needed to jump on that AI bandwagon, but they didn't develop an AI strategy ahead of time. And I think in 2024, we're really going to see a lot of organizations figuring out where the best use cases are, how to get going with AI, trying some things that work and maybe some things that don't work, and then figuring out where the real value of AI is. What's the real productivity? People are going to have to really prove the value of AI. And another thing, and Kevin, you and I can talk about this a little more, there may not be enough done in terms of end user education. Some workers may be using these new tools without really understanding how they work and what they do. And we might see some end user frustration. I'm really hoping we don't have a replay of what happened when chatbots were first introduced, when, companies, ran in, they put chatbots on their websites and they weren't very good, and end users got really frustrated and just stopped using it. And I really hope we don't see a replay of that with AI. And so basically, despite AI's promise, there's going to be a lot of mistakes made along the way. And especially when it comes to generative AI, because that's, in the world of AI, that's relatively new. And another point I made in the article is that vendors are going to need to focus on the value of AI as well as responsible AI. They're going to need to focus on security, privacy, ethics, and also data. And someone commented on my LinkedIn post, data is going to be really important, and we need to talk about that a little bit more. And so really, I see that the vendors that rise to the top are going to be the ones that can ensure proper governance and appropriate guardrails. I think guardrails is going to be a big, big term we're going to hear a lot of in the coming year, and really that focus on privacy and security. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to some of my BCStrategies colleagues. So John, why don't we start with you? What are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, okay, Blair, thanks for checking in. And for those who haven't seen Blair's article, you should check it out for sure. And I want to go right to the end, actually, where you talk about a ChatGPT generated poem. And
I thought you didn't like that poem.
I didn't. But I
He's
think
just going to criticize it. Yes.
As Martha would say, I have no further evidence to submit, Your Honor. It tells you, where it's at for things that are beyond the obvious. And I'm totally with you. Everything is really got to be about setting, reasonable expectations. Not just so much for what it can and cannot do, but, we're all kind of in that category where most of the people now in this space who are bubbling up into the decision making are a lot younger than us, and they're the digital natives. And for them, these things are kind of almost like accepted, taken for granted. I mean, they just see that this is going to be the future. And if they don't really come from the analog generation where we can see the holes, I think, a lot faster than they can in some of these things. But clearly, we just know it's just not. It's getting better, and the part of the expectations that I emphasize the most is the idea that how AI is different than previous types of technologies we've looked at. And the main thing here is that AI is iterative, right? It just keeps getting better the more you use it. And that's not the same as a lot of technologies people are used to using, that it's out of the box, it works the same way all the time. This is something that may not be that great out of the gate. And that's when you talk about experimentation. And like, okay, yeah, that you can start with this, but don't set your expectations. It's got to be perfect from the start. Never will be. It'll be, as you say, there'll be a lot of false positives. And part of the learning, I think, is to know how to recognize them for starters. And then you build on that. And then I think you get past that point of, well, it's only good for certain things. But then when once you start to train it, it's like your new dog, right? Once you break it in, Kevin, you could probably speak to that one. Just once the dog is broken in and behaves the way you want it to behave, yeah, you're going to keep that dog, right? I mean, you're going to attach to it. AI is no different. It'll once it starts, but again, this comes from the position that as long as we are the master, right, that we're the ones in control, not AI driving us, because that's eventually what will happen long after we're out of the workforce, I think. But that we're not there yet. And the last thing I'll just say quickly, Blair, is, to that poem at the end, I think it helps people recognize what AI can and cannot do very well. And my concern is, of course, things that make us human, call it whatever, music, humor, creativity, things that AI is not natively built to do. We're a long, long way from having that. And thankfully, because if AI gets to the point where it can do all of that stuff as well as we can, there's not much left for us to do, really.
Yep. It's not taking our humanity yet. So one thing you mentioned, and most people know that I'm a real Beatles freak. So John, I like the way you talked about how it's getting better all the time, and I think that's very true about AI. And yeah, AI won't replace Lennon and McCartney for sure, based on that poem anyway. So Kevin, why don't we talk a little bit, if you can touch on the need for adoption and training, because you and I have done that survey on the unified communication space. How user adoption and training is so important, and I think it's also AI is just a really perfect use case for it, because people are going in there, they don't know really how to use it, they don't know what the best practices are. So I think this is a really good area where we need to talk about this. So if you can touch on that, and then some other areas you might want to talk about.
Yeah, no, thanks, Blair. So I just want to start by, you said we have lots of different opinions. So I think John is like pretty much totally wrong on a bunch of things that he said, but to explore the issue in a friendly way. So I think people, that say it's not very good yet, I think that that's a really short-sighted view, because it's going to get much better, much quicker. And there's been a bunch of studies, including one by Boston Consulting Group, that showed the things that actually AI excels at are the more creative tasks. And the things that it makes errors at is the more numeric stuff. It gets numbers wrong. And the difference is that, as compared to other tools, like, let's face it, people don't know how to use X lookups in Excel, but when they don't know, like, they just fail. Whereas with AI, it comes up with something that kind of seems like it's right. And if you don't double check the numbers, you can get into a world of pain and potentially liability, which I'm sure Martha will talk about. So I do think that it's going to get a lot better, a lot quicker. And, don't assume that it's really good at those kind of rote mathematical, like sciencey tasks, and not good at creativity. Because I think, brainstorming and giving you ideas and ideation, people are finding that it actually does a pretty good job. The other thing that I just want to point out, or just make sure that the audience understands, is, John, you talked about AI constantly getting better, but, when you're using these large language models, the people in your business, when you're using it, it's not getting better at all because your company's using it a whole bunch. It gets better when the large language model provider, continues to train the model. And that's very different than if you build your own AI model. And I think right now, between AI in the background, generative AI, and then organizations that are, working with data scientists to build their own AI models, I think for the general public and even for a whole bunch of analysts, they just mush all those together. And then, they're not really sure what's what, and, is it being retrained on customer data? And this is where user adoption and training is important, because Brent Kelly and I are doing a session at Enterprise Connect to look at the different AI, the generative AI on the different platforms. So from Microsoft, from Zoom, from Cisco, from Google. And we're spending a ton of time trying to figure out, like, where does your data go? And how can you control it? And can you control it? And that seems like it should be easy to answer. It's certainly important to know before you turn on certain capabilities, but it's very confusing. And it's, if you look in the Microsoft ecosystem, where I spend a bunch of time, it doesn't help that Microsoft has Copilot and Copilot Pro and Copilot for Microsoft 365. And each of those are different products and handle data a little bit different. Now, the information is out there, but are end users going to go figure it out? I think the answer is probably no. And most IT pros are going to struggle to figure that out as well. So certainly, first and foremost, to your point, Blair, lots of experimentation. If you're an IT pro turning on these capabilities, you need to go figure out where the data is going, because you don't want intellectual property, going to organizations that, you're not comfortable with. So definitely, an interesting, challenging 2024, but an exciting one.
Absolutely. So you brought up some good points, and we definitely have to talk about some of the legal and liability issues that are going to come to the forefront, especially as it comes to end user data and training for the AI model, proper use of user and customer data, and basically unexpected or harmful outcomes from some of the AI recommendations. So we have our resident legal expert with us, Martha Beyer. So Martha, let's hear from you.
So first of all, thank you. And secondly, please read Blair's article if you haven't done so already. I have one small bone to pick with it, but it's a very small one. And that is that what it references is that you need to recognize that it is that processes are done without bias. I think that's not the exact quote. I would say that's not correct. I would say there is always bias. The question is identifying where it is. So I would say in my book on this, you guys started at about chapter 3, and I'm back at chapter 1. You need to understand as a consumer, as an enterprise consumer, what is the process? How is the math being done? How are the processes that you're going to rely on to make decisions? How are those being calculated? The great example about this is from a book that I just read, whose name escapes me at the moment. But she talks about the creation of the faucets that are in most airport bathrooms. And they work automatically. You run your hand underneath them and the water comes out. And that's probably been all of our experience. But when they were first deployed, they didn't deploy on darker skinned hands because no one had checked. Now, that was not intentional. It was accidental. But if you don't understand how essentially the sausage is being made, it's hard to know what you're actually buying. That's the first point I would make. The second point is, I think the contracts have to be read very carefully, because these guys know what they're doing. And if you're relying on an AI output to make an important decision, who's liable when it goes wrong? It's not just automatic cars. It's not just decisions about medical tumor or about tumors or anything like that. You really need to know how the conclusions are being drawn. And I would say many vendors that are offering AI products aren't willing to share that because that's their secret sauce. So I would pay attention to that. I would pay attention particularly to auto renewal provisions, which are like on page 14 of the contract, by which point you're tired of it anyway. Because if the contract renews automatically, you may be using an old version of the process, when in fact newer versions are much more accurate. So I think that it's a specialty for sure, but I think you really need to understand how the sausage is made before diving into the product, for exactly the reasons that Blair mentions. There are going to be lots of false starts. That's fine, but it's not okay if it's my tumor that you miss or my car repair that you miss or whatever it is. You need to have a good understanding of how the processes work.
Well, so to pick on your bone of contention, actually what I said in the article is that the AI vendors will need to consider the impact of AI on society in general while eliminating bias in their applications and focusing on ethical guidelines.
So I would say eliminating bias is not really possible. I would say recognizing bias and managing to it is the strategy.
Okay.
It's
excellent.
It's a fine point, Blair. It's a wonderful article.
Nope. No, thank you for pointing that out. That's great. And yeah, I think it's really important, there are going to be so many issues that come up. All the vendors are talking about having, these meeting, catch me up and highlight things. So what happens if the AI got something wrong and someone missed something in the meeting that was really important, or it captioned something wrong, in the highlights? Who's going to be responsible for that if the user makes a mistake based on the information that the AI gave them? So I said in the article, is AI going to become the new dog that ate my homework? There's going to be issues that are going to come up. So who's going to take responsibility for it? So Joseph, yeah. So Joseph, you've been in the thick of AI for years before many of us, knew how to spell AI. So I'm sure you have a lot of things to add to this discussion.
So 2024 will be a year where a lot of the vendors are going to collect data and train their models. So they're using common data sets right now, and there's no reason in the world why Microsoft and Cisco and Zoom can't now curate their own data and build robustness into their models. One of the things that worries me, so the University of Toronto, to use them as an example, one of the finest AI universities in the world, only graduates, 100 people a year, and puts them into the market. University of Washington here in Seattle, about the same numbers of AI people. As I go around the world talking to companies, the people who do AI for them, generally speaking, Blair, are not impressive people. They're capable, but they're not impressive. And so I think what we're at is the market demand is such that companies who have very strong aspirations in this space simply don't have the talent, which is why they're going to rely on Microsoft Copilot and why they're going to rely on the other vendors. And what effectively that means is if everybody uses Copilot as their foundation, where are we getting the incremental improvement in the way AI is actually being developed? Not really sure. Helps Copilot get better, but does it really float all the boats in the industry? I worry about this. I'm not the only one who worries about this. There was an article this week talking about how universities just don't have a pipeline in order to push this forward. India has said they've trained 300,000 people on AI, but if you actually peel the cover back on that, that's taking one course, maybe two courses on how to do parameter programming in ChatGPT or something like that. So I think lack of talent is going to be a big problem. I think it was Kevin who mentioned cybersecurity. I'm very worried about privacy, cybersecurity. We don't know how this technology is going to be used. There's sentiment analysis already finding its way into UC tools. And what if the sentiment analysis thinks I'm angry, but really I'm just from a culture that's very expressive, and it misinterprets that and records that I'm very angry. I've already seen this happening with interview software, which is crap. Almost all the interview AI software is really bad because they try to do sentiment analysis. They try to track eyes and expressions in ways that is really not proven in science. So that's a big concern of mine. And then Martha touched on my big thing, since I now work back in the policy space. Regulations are coming. 12 states have already introduced regulation bills to regulate AI. Europe has a big AI bill coming. Canada is talking about it. They're not doing it, but they're talking about it. China regulates AI in a very unique kind of way. And so if you're making investments in your product or in your enterprise platform, and you're not thinking about the ways in which those investments are going to be regulated, you're probably going to be surprised in a year or two, would be my guess. So those are my observations.
Thank you, Joseph. And coming from you, because as I said, you've been doing this for a long time and your observations are very important. Kevin, I believe you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think one of the points that you raised, Joseph, I found that fascinating because it's like, of course, there's not enough, AI professionals. What I found kind of ironic about that is, AI was and maybe is going to be one of the things that they thought a technology that could help deal with the shortage of coding professionals, right? So, in some respects, being able to write in natural language, with the Copilot initially was released in GitHub, and a lot of code is now being AI assisted. So potentially upskilling some coders. And yet, so it's kind of solving one problem while potentially, creating a problem in another area. I just found that interesting that you brought that up.
Well, you're absolutely right. ChatGPT improves my coding, both for the scripting languages I use. It actually helps me on my R when I'm working with large data sets.
Right.
I just go to ChatGPT and ask them, how would you phrase this? And it's always better than what I would do. I'm a terrible programmer.
Well, and what I find interesting too is, you hear examples, like almost every day I hear an example of somebody using AI in a different way that I didn't think of. And so even with like coding, people think about, okay, writing the code. Of course, you got to do that. But a big part of coding is also testing the code. And one of the most boring thing is coming up with test cases. And so you can ask, ChatGPT or Copilot to create a whole bunch of sample data to run through, because before you may not have the exact data sets or, so there's all these different kind of, I'll say, creative ways that people are experimenting, back to your article, Blair, experimenting and learning. And I think we're going to have a great opportunity to kind of share what works and what doesn't work inside our own, groups of colleagues.
Yeah, another area that's really going to boom is prompt engineering. Now, I've been seeing so many things about, we can help you learn how to, be better at prompt engineering because, generative AI is all about the prompts that you feed into it. And the better you can really drill down on what it is you're trying to do, the better results you're going to get. So that's going to be a huge area that people are going to really be focusing on. We have a few more minutes. Let's talk a little bit about pricing and how you see pricing kind of unfolding. We have Microsoft is charging $30 for its business edition, and they just announced $20 for their SMB and consumer. Kevin, I believe you wrote an article about that. Zoom and Cisco are still giving their assistant Copilot type things away for free. And John and I actually were just on a call this morning talking about some of these things. So what do some of you see as far as pricing, and are we pricing it appropriately? What do we know what people are going to be willing to pay, where the value is? Any thoughts on that?
I have a quick question for Kevin. Is the $30 actually the EA price, or is that just the street price?
No, that's the MSRP, the EA price, right? And just to be clear, Blair, I think you said the $20 was from SMB. It's really the $30 is for any size organization, like you can have a business professional. The $20, the
for consumers.
Poorly named Copilot Pro, is if you have a family or personal license, you can add Copilot Pro, which sounds like it's the best edition, but it's actually the middle tier edition, right? So, but yeah, it's $30. And when they say that, you must make an annual commitment. So if you're an SMB and you want to experiment, it's a $360 expenditure is your minimum getting in point, which at least they lowered it as of January 15th to you can buy a single license. Prior to January 15th, you had to buy a minimum of 300 licenses. So obviously, for much bigger organizations.
But for a large organization, a Siemens or a Walmart, we're talking seriously big numbers.
It is. It's significant. And, I'm of two minds. If you know how to use the capability, and if you are using it on a regular basis, this comes back, Blair, to the usage and adoption, $360 for an individual, I mean, that's, it would be easy to imagine situations where it could make you $360 more effective, even in a month, let alone over the course of a year. Of course, I mean, we saw this with PSTN connectivity and, telephone usage. In some organizations, 1% of people make telephone calls. So if you spend $360, and if in your organization 1% or 10% of the people are using Copilot, that's going to end up being a terrible investment. And then, arguably some people right now are saying, it's interesting to try, but it's actually taking me more time to fix the mistakes, to review the output and fix the mistakes that Copilot introduced. I mean, then that's a negative investment. So I think people are going to have to charge for it somehow, because there's huge costs into training and then running or using the inferencing, have the model do the inference. So, an organization is going to have to, bring some revenue in to cover that additional cost. That's at least my feeling.
Yeah, I think when we talk about experimentation, pricing is going to be another area where I think the vendors are going to be doing a lot of experimentation to figure out, what consumers and businesses are willing to pay. Because right now we just don't know. It's a whole new game right now.
Mm-hmm.
Martha, I think you wanted to add something about data.
Yeah, so I want to go back because I have no comment about pricing. I have not a clue. But one of them is when you're looking at the data sets that are being used to create whatever the AI output is, it's very important to remember that that's only, by definition, it's historical only. So all of the inputs are what happened before, and maybe those are good predictors of what's coming in the future, but maybe they're not. And the second point is, and this is kind of a big duh moment, but I think it's also important to remember, AI has no common sense. So while the Kevin's comments earlier about it becoming increasingly creative, I think we could discuss that. But the fact is, it's based on existing models, but it doesn't have the common sense to recognize, to adjust to the fact that, for example, there's going to be a tornado tomorrow, or who knows what's going to happen. So I think those are two really important factors that people need to consider before they jump in. Yeah. Or as they jump in and manage and watch how the systems are working.
Yeah, those are great points. And I was thinking the other day about when AI is used in the contact center, people are always asking me, is it going to replace agents, or companies going to get rid of their call center agents? And the answer is no. These agents, you mentioned common sense. These agents have common sense, and they also have experience, dealing with customers. The AI doesn't. So the AI is just going to, read what do what it's programmed to do, and make decisions based on the data that it's been fed. But it doesn't have the worldly experience to be able to know, okay, for this type of customer, this is the type of service they expect, and this is what they're looking for, and this is how I can help them.
So let me just add one more point on that, which is Kevin just sent a note that said he thinks that AI will replace agents. The problem is AI can be great when things are going well. But when you have a problem that's out of the range of what the AI is programmed to accommodate, exactly, things get very ugly very quickly.
Yeah, but in an industry, Martha, where contact center turnover is 130% annually, you don't have the deep experience in tier one support that Blair's referring to. I think Kevin's right. Tier one gets replaced by AI. Tier two, which is also higher paid, better people, will handle the complexity that you're talking about, Martha.
Yeah. Well, and think about the bounds of human intelligence. There are boundaries of human intelligence. When I go to my GP, a lot of times, when the kids were smaller, I would bring all the vaccine research data for the newer vaccines. I mean, that was outside the bounds of, all of us. I think, there's blind spots where we don't know. So the fact that there's blind spots for AI, I mean, ask any expert in any field, he or she is going to know certain things and be mistaken about other things. And there's, I think it is a problem to be aware of, but whether it's artificial intelligence or human intelligence, I think you always have to kind of be aware that you need to get different opinions.
So I'll say that my very first real job out of college was on a contact center. And it was a long time ago. Things were very primitive, but the agents and some of you may have heard me tell the story before, the agents got ranked every month. And everybody knew that the agent who finished second in the rankings was smarter than everybody else put together. But she didn't finish first, she finished second. And it wasn't until later when someone went back and analyzed what the agent number one was doing, she was hanging up on all the complex calls so that her numbers would be better. And that's the kind of common sense approach that we need to make room for. Okay,
but that was a human. That was kind of like a counterfactual example. You prove why we need AI, as long as it's aligned to the. But no, I think it's an interesting example. I'm sure we're going to have AI hanging up on people in different contexts
for different reasons.
Well, I think this sets us up for our next LinkedIn Live podcast to talk about AI in the contact center. Is it going to replace agents, or in any situation, is it going to replace workers? So, Kevin, I think we have our next topic. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you everyone for attending and participating. And if you haven't already, please follow BC Strategies on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter. That's pretty new, and we're working really hard on it. Thank you, Kevin. And also visit the BC Strategies website. And if you'll be at Enterprise Connect in March, many of us are going to be there. So come by and find us and say hi. So with that, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Blair.